Hello and welcome back to Live from Paris. I'm joined now here in the studio by Owen Fairclough, our business editor. Hi, Owen. So we're going to start off with the markets. They seem to be reverting to form a little bit over Greece.
Yeah, you could say reverting to type, although they have managed to find a few gains at the opening bell, Lorna, absolutely right. Of course, we've got all those residual worries about exactly whether this country is going to get that second bailout and, of course, whether it is all too late to stop it defaulting. Let's leave that aside for the moment, though, because the European markets have opened up with a few gains between 0.1 and around 1/3% up in London, Paris and Frankfurt. Choppy days trading on the Asian markets. The Nikkei did close around 1% down. The Hang Seng has managed to pull back, and you can see they're just ending the day in the green a little bit, as is the Kospi.
And it looks like BP as well, pulling away from that disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. Better results now.
Yeah, a second successive set of good results after, you might remember, last year recording a $5 billion loss with all those costs associated with clearing up after the Deepwater Horizon disaster. Latest results for the fourth quarter for BP, just under $8 billion profit. That's a 38% increase. BP's raising its dividend, but also warning investors that it's likely to have a fairly long slog ahead with all the costs incurred of fighting various trials that it's involved in because of that environmental disaster. Toyota third quarter profits down. Many Japanese car makers and household brands are having a pretty tough earnings season. I'll just mention Xstrata as well while we're talking earnings. Full year net profit up to just under $6 billion, but it's also confirmed the details of that mega tie-up with Glencore to create one of the world's biggest commodities companies. They do say it's a merger of equals, but it does appear to be more of a takeover, with Xstrata having its shares valued at a 15% premium, and Xstrata will only own 45% of the new company that it's founding with Glencore. Well, while we're talking earnings as well, it's worth noting that UBS, the Swiss bank, has seen its share price dip nearly 2% on European markets as well this Tuesday morning. That was after reporting fourth quarter profits down nearly 80%. Our correspondent in Basel, Victoria Morgan, has more on this for us. Good morning to you, Victoria. Just first of all, take us through some of the numbers that UBS has been reporting today.
So UBS is trying to see the glass half full this morning, but most analysts I've spoken to see the glass more half empty, calling this below expectations. So profit for UBS in 2011 comes to 5.5 billion francs now, even when you factor in that 2.3 billion franc mega loss from that rogue trader. Profits are still down on 2010 by £1 billion francs. And profits in the last quarter of 2011, now that was the quarter after that loss came to light, down 76% on 2010. UBS did manage to attract money into the wealth management business, over 50 billion francs over the whole year, although only 3.5 billion of that came in the last quarter of 2011. So confidence in UBS seems to have taken a bit of a knock there too, and that's the most profit-making bit, so that's quite serious for them.
Now, you mentioned, Victoria, that profits are down, but they are still managing to turn a profit. So is there anything positive we can take away from these results?
Of course, they're much happier to make a profit than to not. And UBS is in a fortunate position in another respect. It doesn't have the threat of a US lawsuit hanging over it for helping US taxpayers evade taxes. Now, that's, of course, because in 2009 they came to a deal where they handed over nearly 5,000 taxpayers' names. But 11 other Swiss banks have been named by US lawmakers as they think having helped tax evasion. And under this spotlight, they've been sending out very mixed messages, some saying maybe we should agree individual deals with the US. Now, if they did cut a deal to hand over taxpayers' details without the US having identified them beforehand, that would effectively mean the end of banking secrecy in Switzerland.
OK, Victoria Morgan in Basel, thank you very much indeed for joining us. Now, French President Nicolas Sarkozy thinks being a bit more German is one way of making his country more competitive. Well, the latest figures show he has his work cut out for him. The French trade deficit's risen to a new record, and it's a stark contrast to the export-driven boom taking place right next door. Here's Caterina Vitozzi with more.
A balance sheet that's not as bad as anticipated. A strangely optimistic conclusion by the French Minister for Foreign Trade. Why strange? Because at nearly 70 billion euros, the French trade deficit is at a record high. That beats the previous peak in 2008 of 56 billion, although it is less than what was forecast. French exports have struggled to keep up with its European neighbours, Germany in particular, a country whose example the French president is keen to emulate by hiking VAT to pay for a more flexible labour market.
Why shouldn't you follow the example of those on the other side of the border? Chancellor Merkel has often said to me, the social policies you have here are great, we should copy them in Germany. And often I say to her, the way that German business wins foreign contracts, that's great, and we should copy that.
With a trade surplus set to exceed €157 billion for 2011, Germany is Europe's expert in exports. France does, however, have some top-performing industries. Its aeronautics sector posted an €18 billion surplus, mainly thanks to Airbus outselling all competitors. And yet, there's still a fight for France to maintain a share of global markets. Since 1990, the country's slice of international trade has almost halved to just under 4%.
Now, the proposed flotation by Facebook has investors around the world rubbing their hands in anticipation at the growth of this social network, particularly in emerging markets, and nowhere less so in India, which has the biggest internet market after the United States and China. But both Facebook and Google currently face a huge test of their future viability and indeed the freedom of their websites, because they're embroiled in a court trial over indecency laws. Vikram Singh sent us this report.
With more than 100 million internet users, India is a major market for internet giants Google and Facebook. The two companies, however, are facing trial for hosting images deemed controversial on their sites. Cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad, pictures of Hindu gods on bikinis, and caricatures of Indian politicians. This is the journalist whose complaint landed the two companies in court.
Our country is a democracy, but there is too much freedom of speech. Millions of people are uploading content, and these companies are generating revenue from that. They have to take responsibility for the content.
Google and Facebook say it's technologically impossible for them to control all the content on their sites. If convicted, their top managers could face imprisonment, an outcome that's unacceptable for the two companies.
They can't have a situation where their CEOs are liable for content that any one of their users writes. Then they will just shut down what is, for Facebook, is their fourth largest market, I believe. It should be somewhat similar. So they'll just stop services to Indians.
A court decision censoring online content could also spell trouble for the thousands of new internet startups in India. That's why, at every hearing, online entrepreneurs are turning up to make sure their voices are heard.
We don't have any other business. He makes cartoons on the website. I have a blog. So if they will block it, we can't survive.
In order to comply with the demands of the court in another case against it, Google recently announced that it would remove certain images deemed offensive, a compromise to ensure its continued presence in a country which will have 300 million internet users by 2015.
Vikram Singh reporting there. Well, thanks very much indeed, Owen, for that look at all today's top business news. And that's just about it from us for now. But don't go away. There's more headlines coming up with Stuart right after the weather. Next.